So, hello and welcome to the fifth and last lecture of the online guest lecture series on Franz Kafka that is being organized by the Global Languages Center of Jindal Global University. Last week, Professor Rajendra Dingle, in his talk on A Path Less Traveled, Opacity and Imagination in Franz Kafka's shorter stories, invited us through his kaleidoscopic arrangement of thought chains to think with Schopenhauer while attempting to understand Kafka's short story, The Hunger Artist. Drawing upon the frenetic shift within the Schopenhauerian trajectory of thought, he showed us how the hunger artist can be a fellow sufferer in Kafka's world theater of extended naturalism. An ascetic who ceaselessly fasts without any hope or belief in salvation. The hunger artist who is acutely aware of the politics of reception of art and still chooses to pursue his art of fasting while losing track of time, and with that of memory, thus ends the tyranny of the higher self over the lower self. References from texts, literary texts such as The Vegetarian by Han Kang and The Woman in the Dunes by Kobo Abe were given in order to substantiate the relevance of Kafkian thought in contemporary lived experiences. So it is evident that Kafka's heroes are drifters in a world devoid of metaphysical anchoring and suffering from the demons of absurdity and alienation. Their worlds are characterized by utter hopelessness and by sheer lack of reason. They all seem to portray what Heidegger called Geworfenheit or thrownness. They are individual existences who are simply thrown into the world and not by choice. And there seems no exit for them. Today we take a closer look at Der Bau, the Burrow, a novella which attracts attention since it was the last unfinished work of Kafka. To understand this work, we have with us Dr. Rosy Singh, who is an associate professor and current chairperson at the Center of German Studies, JNU. She has authored books such as Essays on Contemporary Literature in German, 2017, Franz Kafka and Literary Criticism, The Metamorphosis and the Burrow, 2010, and Rilke, Kafka, Manto, Semiotics of Love, Life and Death, 2001. The topic of her doctoral thesis was Existentielle Situationen in den Werken Franz Kafkas, eine semiotische Analyse. Her areas of interest comprise of literature, comparative studies, semiotics, and translation studies. She has also published several research papers and book reviews in various international journals and has organized several conferences. She has supervised several MPhil and PhD students. She is a member of editorial board of the German Studies in India. That's a journal published by the Department of German Kerala University. She's a member of academic advisory committees of several universities, such as the University of Karnataka, BHU, Doon University, and the Central University of Gujarat. Today, Dr. Singh will speak on the topic, But All Remained Unchanged, Existential Predicament in Franz Kafka's The Burrow. With that, I hand over the virtual mic to you, Rosy.
Thank you, Dr. Shruti. Thank you for the kind words. I think the only identity I am comfortable with is being a teacher. Other, other posts, chairperson and membership of this, that they come and go. And as a teacher, I think that is what I like doing. So I'm also very happy to be here today with you. You organized lectures, which actually I should have done with my thesis on Kafka and all my fascination with his works. So, but I'm glad you organized it and I'm very happy to be part of it. So I start with the title itself, Existential Predicament in Franz Kafka's Der Bau. why have I used this word existential? I think I need to explain a little bit and let it also be a point of departure for my presentation, because I would be using it quite a lot. So I don't mean existential in the sense of the existentialist movement that happened in France after the Second World War. So I'm not, every movement has its specificities, and I'm not going into the specificities of that movement. That is not my intention at all. Although Kafka is often called as the literary precursor of French existentialism, but I'm using the term existential in a more general, in a more universal sense of the term. I'm reminded of a book I read sometime back, Rüdiger Safranski's now famous book on romanticism in Germany. It's called Romantik eine deutsche Affäre. And he says there is a romantic movement fixed in time and space, but there is also a romantic spirit, the romantische Geist. So that spirit of a movement existed perhaps before the movement also in different ways, and after the movement withers away, that may still, traces of it still remain. And even in contemporary times, you can see the romantic spirit in, various expressions of romantic spirit, for example, in Germany. The way Germans are, almost fanatic about Umwelt, about environment, how they segregate garbage at home, how they, climate change, etc. So they are romantic about the environment. So the romantic spirit you can find even today. And similarly, I would say existentialism as a movement was long over, but its traces are there today, and they were always there. So many poets, philosophers, they have always talked about the human existence. When Sophocles starts with it in Greek literature, there is when Shakespeare says through Hamlet, to be or not to be, that is the question. So which question is he talking about? He is talking about the existential question. Who am I? What is my place in this world? What am I doing here? So these are the existential questions. These are the general forms of existentialism, and that is what interests me also. So it's, like I said, a tradition, it's a attitude, a way of thinking that cannot be confined by a movement or by a theory. I would like to give another example. A person asks me, how are you? And then I take, it may be a rhetorical question, but I would take it very seriously, and I start asking myself, so how am I feeling? Am I good? Am I sad? What should I say? I mean, I take the question so seriously that it becomes an existential question, and then you can't answer it, because nobody can seriously say I'm fine. You can say it for small talk, but I don't think anybody can really say I'm happy with life. Even Sophocles said the last lines of his play, the Oedipus Rex. Nobody count no man happy till he or she is in the grave. So that for me is the existential question. I also took some diary notings of Kafka. The diaries are very also literary works. The language is literary, the themes are literary. He refers to a small conversation between him and between his mother and the neighboring woman. So his mother asks the neighboring woman, what are you doing? And the neighbor replies, I'm having a cup of tea. So Kafka, in his typical style, he's astonished. He says, this woman knows exactly what she is doing. There's also, it's humorous, and it's also like, actually he's wondering that how come she knows what she's doing when I don't know, and most people don't know what they are actually doing. Then, I'm sorry, I should have changed the slide. Okay, so I've also taken some more notings from the diary. Before I come to the narrative, the Burrow. So these diary notings refer to, of course, his passion for writing. I've taken deliberately small quotations, have written nothing for 3 days. Hold fast to the diary from today on. Exclamatory mark, write regularly, exclamatory mark, don't surrender. Today, painfully tired, spent the afternoon on the sofa. Now in the evening, out of boredom, washed my hands in the bathroom 3 times in succession. Wrote nothing. Nothing written for so long. Wrote nothing. Nothing, nothing. The last 3 entries are on consecutive days, 9th, 10th, and 11th. So now you take the last entry, for example, nothing, nothing. Now this these 2 words, repetition of nothing, it's not really nothing. It is loaded with signification. It says a lot. It refers to his frustration at not being able to proceed with his writing. But he did write 2 words, and those 2 words are not say a lot. It's like an oxymoron, that it's the opposite actually of, he's saying he's written nothing, but that nothing says it all. So writing for Kafka was a kind of existential necessity. Then one more quotation I have, ich werde mich nicht müde werden lassen. Ich werde in meine Novelle hineinspringen, und wenn es mir das Gesicht schneiden sollte. I will not let myself become tired. I will jump into my novelle should it cut my face to pieces. I think it's a very nice way of putting it, that how seriously he took his writing. Even if it killed him, even if, but he could not stop writing. So like I said, he did not, Kafka, I would say, did not belong to any particular movement. Although some critics do try to place him in, say, the symbolism or what is it called, expressionism in Germany. But I would say it's difficult to, place him firmly, like some poets, romantic poets, for example. Eichendorff is clearly a romantic poet. But in case of Kafka, one cannot so clearly define him, that he is part of this movement. I would just say his generation was that of the turn of the century artists. He was, I think, born around, when was it, 1874, was it, or 76? So end of 19th century and beginning of 20th century, 1924, he died. So I would just go that far to say he was a turn of century writer in Prague. And Prague in those days was not the Prague of today. It was, today it's a magnet for tourists. In Europe, I think it has the same status, almost the same status as Paris or London. But in those days, the turn of the century, Paris was still considered provincial, vis-a-vis, say, Vienna or Berlin, and of course, Paris. Now, just a few words about his mode of presentation. I would say, I think I said it once before also, it is that was turn of the century. I think in Germany it was still realism, naturalism as literary periods, but what Kafka does is he does not reject realism, but he's also not a realist. So what he does is something which is maybe he was one of the first, not the first, but maybe one of the first writers who blended realism with fantasy, with fantastic literature. So it was a kind of what's called seamless fusion of the real and the fantastic, or real and the surreal. The surrealists always strove to have this dream-like combination of reality and fantasy, which you find in dreams. But before them, Kafka had already done it. It's just that it went unnoticed for a long time. So then even there is an interesting, fairly good article by Paul Sartre on Kafka. Both Sartre and Camus were quite fond of Kafka. So Sartre says in this article, Kafka domesticated fantasy, fantastic literature, to transcribe the human condition. So, and Milan Kundera, in his book, Art of the Novel, he calls it an aesthetic revolution. The way Kafka managed to fuse together two very different modes of presentation, realism and fantasy. And he could be very precise and he could exaggerate. So that the precision came from realism, describing the details, and exaggeration came from fantasy. As you have also, for example, in his most famous work, Metamorphosis, it starts with a fantastic motive, transformation, man into animal, or human into non-human. But then it became very real. The way details are described, the umpteen legs, and how this beetle turns upside down, lying upside down, and then comes back on its legs, and how it moves till the door and opens slowly the doors with its jaw, and what the room looks like. These are all details from realism. So this was, I would say, this was his contribution, and this ultimately led to all. Further, we have, there's a chain of movements. We have surrealism, then Picasso's cubism, and all that. All these movements, Dadaism starts. So a lot of these movements, they are in a way interconnected. Now I come to the second part of my paper, and that is on this narrative called a Bau. Now, Bau in German has, of course, many meanings. One is, the common one is the construction. You make a building. The bauen is to construct, the verb bauen. And but there's another meaning also, that is the burrow. And almost all translators of Kafka, of this narrative, have used the title the burrow. And I think it's also right, because the protagonist is an animal who makes a burrow. It is not a construction which is made over the earth, but it's not a vertical construction. It is something which which is underground. It is like it is a burrow. So I think that translation in English is the right one. Now, this is a surprisingly little known narrative. I think the first stories of Kafka that became popular were Metamorphosis and his novel The Trial, and then Castle, America, and some other stories. There's Report for an Academy, Hunger Artist, and these were the more, this is how reception of Kafka started. But somehow this narrative, it was, I've gone through these typical standard works on Kafka, Hunt, Busher, as they are called. And even there is very little mention of this narrative. Why that is so, I'm not sure. But in fact, I find more references to this narrative in the visual media. In somehow the paintings or visual, even videos, or there's an opera that I saw some years ago in Delhi, a French opera on this story, and that's how I then got interested in it. It was it's a one-man, one protagonist opera, very nicely done. I tried to find it again in internet, but in those days there was no internet, and maybe it was not recorded or whatever. So anyway, and this was, I'm not sure if it was the last story he wrote. Maybe, from what I gather, it was maybe the penultimate story, or he was working on two last stories at the same time, around 1923, 24. And this was, you can say, he was working on it from his deathbed. All the corrections were being done, and later on it was published posthumously in 1931 by his friend. Some call him his enemy, Max Brod, who published his works without his explicit permission. It's a story of about 35 pages, so it's not a really short story, or it's quite long. The title itself is by Max Brod, not by Kafka. And it's in first-person narration. So there is, like, so many stories of Kafka. We have discussed it in Anu Pandey's lecture. So many of his Kafka stories have animals, or now they are not called animals, they're called non-humans. So the protagonist is here is, in each such story, there is, Kafka chooses his animals carefully. It's not just, he plans it, it suits the story. So sometimes it's an ape, sometimes it's a beetle or a cockroach. Sometimes it's some fantastic creature which you can't define. It's a mixture of two, like there's in one story, it's a blending of lamb and cat. So according to the storyline, the animal is chosen. So here in this story, it's a rodent. It's there are critics who try to define this animal. What exactly would it be? Its main attribute is that it burrows. So, and it has a strong forehead and very strong claws. These are his two features: powerful claws and strong forehead. So there are literary critics that call it a gator, a mole, or a mole-like animal. Dachs in German, Dachsartiges Tier, Maulwurfartiges Tier. So, but an exact identification of this creature is not possible, and neither is it desirable. Because all said and done, it's again the animal, this creature is it stands for for a human condition. It's a more of a metaphor. It's not really an animal story in that sense. Now, this animal possessed with the idea of a perfect house, the animal sweats, slogs, and suffers. The animal sweats, slogs, and suffers. It spends its entire youth making a burrow, a labyrinth of zigzag interconnected tunnels deep inside the earth, where he can live comfortably, safely, enjoying the peace and tranquility. So the two important characteristics of this burrow should be that it's safe, and number two, it should be insulated against noise. It should be very quiet. This is how the narrative opens. The opening proposition, ich habe den Bau eingerichtet und scheint wohl gelungen. It starts with ich, I. Is kind of patting his back. I have completed the construction of my burrow and it seems to be successful. It's taking pride in it. He's quite happy with it. He even calls himself clever. Ein scharfsinniger Kopf. And sometimes he calls it a rescue hole, sometimes just a place of stay, sometimes a house. But he keeps saying, I possess a house. I am in my own house. Nothing can part us for long. You belong to me, I to you, we are one. So this is how the narrative begins, and it goes on and on with the description of the burrow and the construction, what all went into it. Now, what is the topography of this burrow? A great deal of physical and intellectual labor has gone into the architectural design and construction of the burrow. The animal is the mason, the architect, and the engineer. The digging through the loose soil is carried out painstakingly through scratching, biting, pounding, and hammering. So with his powerful claws, he removes the loose soil, a kind of excavation. And with his forehead, he pounds, hammers the walls, makes them solid. And he even says, the ultimate proof of how strong the walls is that when he hits them, pounds on them with his forehead, the blood starts oozing out of his from his forehead, and it mixes with the soil. So that is for him that it's safe and now also fortified against noise. So indeed, the animal works with single-minded dedication and devotion to make a success of this structure. It is a product of his blood and sweat. This burrow must keep away all his opponents, and all this involves laborious calculations. The animal keeps talking about his enemies. Who are the enemies is not mentioned, but there are enemies. Sometimes they're called opponents, sometimes intruders, Eindringliche, but they are there. He's convinced that they are there, and he has to fortify the house, the burrow. It says, all this involves laborious calculations. I must have a way at a moment's notice, for despite all my vigilance, may I not be attacked from some quite unexpected quarter. Like I said, the burrow has to be fortified also against noise. So the animal makes all kinds of calculations about the feasibility, about the perfection of these tunnels. Should the nourishment be, for example, be stored at one place, or should the food, the nourishment, the stocks be distributed in the tunnels? Should the entrance be reconstructed? In this manner, the animal goes back and forth with his decisions. He also takes a childlike delight in the tunnels and the plazas of the burrow. There's something very charming about this creature, how happy he is. I keep saying he, I could also say it, but somehow I'm not sure which pronoun to use, it or he. So how does now this space unfold? The space inside the burrow is divided into a labyrinth, a maze of tunnels, more than 50, with round spacious plazas at every few meters. In the heart of the burrow is the carefully chosen castle keep. In German, it's Burgplatz. And that is where all the meat stores are piled up. All his Vorräte, as it's called in German, are piled up. This is by far the most important section of the house, so to say the animal's kitchen and store for food supplies. It was fashioned by the most arduous labor of my whole body, he says. This is also its favorite place where he allows himself to indulge. Sometimes the creature lies down and rolls about it in pure joy, smiles satisfied, or curls up in comfort. These are, so to say, the happy hours where he chooses between dozing and unconscious sleep, pampers himself with the nourishment of his choice. This condition of in-between condition, when you are not properly asleep, you are not in deep sleep, and neither are you properly awake. So this in-between phase, like in the morning when we wake up, that we find in many stories of Kafka. This is the moment, he calls it the most risky moment of the day, when you are neither here nor there, or you are half here, half there. And that even in Kafka's Metamorphosis, the transformation happens in the early morning when he gets up from uneasy dreams. So that is the moment. And when he's happy, he pampers himself with the nourishment of his choice. He gluts. But there are times when he's so satisfied that he feels no need for nourishment. He doesn't feel any hunger. So it's fluctuating, or you can say drifting between two such conditions. But he's very cautious. He is not complacent. The burrow is subjected to periodic reviews, invariably leading to some repairs and renovations conducted with a great deal of zest and zeal and zest. Tremendous amount of technical considerations go into the pros and cons of each modification. Once in a while, the creature is forced to venture out on hunting expeditions. He has to replenish his stocks, but he does so most reluctantly. So most reluctantly, he leaves his burrow, and then he always returns anxiously to his dwelling, where he recuperates from exhaustion and exertion. Sometimes he likes to sit outside the burrow at a distance, keeping an eye on the entrance, which is vulnerable, as it is just covered by moss. He monitors the traffic around it and looks around for suspicious activity. The burrow is its sanctuary. It protects him from the outside world, and in turn, the animal protects it from others. He says we both need each other. However, the animal cannot rid himself of dark premonitions. He is anxious that the burrow has some weak points, some drawbacks. Pride in the burrow gives way to doubt, and his confidence slowly begins to wane. In the middle of the story, after 18 pages, so in the middle, there is a twist. It's a turning point in the narration. Now, in a drama, we call it peripety. This point, we can use it here also, although it's not a drama. But anyways, this is the uncanny moment. I quote, it says, I must have slept for a long time. I was awakened when I reached the last light sleep, which dissolves of itself, and it must have been very light, for it was an almost inaudible distinct noise that awakened me. I start on my investigations. In spite of all the vigilance and safeguards, the animal starts hearing faint noises through the walls. The noises described as hissing, whistling, or a rustle are hard to trace. The creature keeps investigating the source of the knocking that is causing him considerable angst. He presses his ears against the wall to detect the source. He digs frantically through the walls, but the noises persist. He never comes face to face with the enemy, but the persistence of noises in the fortress agitates and alarms him as it undermines his sense of security. He feels nervous to the extent of paranoia. Is it perhaps just a water pipe? Are there many small animals or one big animal attacking his burrow? Was all his effort of the youth in vain? So the very purpose of the burrow, a place where he can live as he deems fit, is rendered null and void. His world falls apart. The last line says it all, but all remain unchanged that, and then the narrative breaks off. The plan of a completely perfect burrow goes awry and the task remains unaccomplished. His euphoria vanishes and he concedes distraught that the planning had drawbacks which he had overlooked. So like I said, the narrative breaks off and it remains a fragment. And like I said, this narrative has somehow not got the attention it deserves in research on Kafka. There are some standard interpretations, the so-called the biographical interpretations that equate the animal with the writer, the burrow with Kafka's diseased body. You know, he was suffering from tuberculosis. So the tunnels are taken as his respiratory tract, and the knocking is the tuberculosis cuff. Now, I'm really not impressed with such interpretations, and frankly speaking, I reject them, in which artist is the work is taken as a self-portrait, nothing more than a self-portrait, nothing more than the biography of the writer. I find it reductionist with little or no signification for the universal human condition. There are so many interpretations about Kafka's relationship with his father, and that in every text, this Oedipal complex is visible. That the text, like the burrow is Kafka, and the enemy outside is the father trying to enter his space. But like I said, these are a priori interpretation. You have already made up your mind, and that's what you look for in every story. So then what is my interpretation? Then I would say that the narrative provides us with an allegory for the mental thought space of a being where he enjoys the calm and protection from the world outside. This is his sanctuary, his refuge, where he would be free of angst. The chambers can be interpreted as the creative space of memory, imagination, thoughts, fantasies, daydreams, from which a being ultimately derives his nourishment. He can play around with them, fool around with them, enjoy them. The relation of the being with the burrow is thus existential. In this burrow, the animal fortifies himself from the outside world, but in the process, he has also locked himself in. So on one hand, you're safe, you think you're safe from others, but in the process, you're also locked in. And this is the invariable Kafkan trap. The project of a perfect burrow, a perfect dwelling remains unfulfilled. The story also remains unfulfilled, incomplete, although that does not really irritate the reader. The incomplete nature of the story dovetails with the incomplete project and the impossibility of a way out of this existential impasse. Outside this very private and intimate space of the self lurks danger. The other is by definition an intruder, a trespasser who has to be kept out at all costs. Even if he manages to enter, he must be evicted. Fencing of the space is important, as sharing the space with another, even a visitor or someone of his own kind, is out of question, because the space, even if it's infinite, is not meant for two people. No burrow is large enough to accommodate two. And this brings me to Leopold Sartre's famous play, No Exit. There is the last line of the play says it all. Hell is other people. Hell is not where there are instruments of torture. Hell is when you're stuck with people whom you don't like. But at the same time, now this something is not right in the burrow, for there are noises. So this loner by choice, he's not lonely, he's a loner. He seems paradoxically in need of some kind of social contact with the other. And this explains the noises, real or imaginary, and his obsession with an intruder. Similarly, the entrance divides, but also connects. It can betray, but also save. After a long spell of detachment, the animals seek some attachment, and this game of attachment and detachment alternates in life. It's as if two forces are engaged in a combat. At times, the being is seized with angst and he wrestles with an invisible intruder. In other words, the being can neither live with nor without the other, neither with nor without the other. And he's also wrestling at the same time with his own anxieties. And that, I would say, is the existential dilemma. It seems as if there's a psychological warfare within the creature where he is wrestling with the other, as well as his various selves that are working at cross purposes. In this unending relation and non-relation, one is never sure of oneself. The story is thus a presentation of human contradictions and psychic complexities. Its truth is valid for all times, past, present, and future. So in that sense, it's not very historical story. It's like somebody asked last time, what is it about the Second World War, etc. So you don't find that here. It is atemporality that is more present in the story than the temporality. All beings have their respective burrows, but what one does with it is up to the individual. This being supplies his nourishment is, as he says, prouder and richer in content than those of ordinary mortals. So for him, this Burrow is not just a burrow, it's not just a house, it's a dwelling. As Heidegger says, there's this difference between a building and a dwelling. A dwelling, office can't be dwelling. A factory cannot be a dwelling. Even Hölderlin had said, that line has become very famous now. Voller Verdienste, doch dichterische Monat der Mensch. That you may be full of merits or achievements, but yet poetically man dwells. So it is in art that you ultimately dwell, you live. And so to return to this text, I'm close to the end, 5 minutes more. So like I said, this digging creature has a sensibility that is acute. Artists live in their respective burrows where their creativity flourishes. At the same time, this burrow is always in a flux. It is never complete. The inner space may define freedom and free will, but in the Kafkan world, that too is an illusion. Just a few words about the trope of digging. This is a motive that we often find in the Romantic epoch. It refers to self-exploration, digging within yourself, boring deep into yourself, and maybe creating something aesthetic out of it. So burrowing literally involves removing material, digging, removing material. It's the opposite actually of building something over the earth. It's more of a kind of excavation, like an archaeologist. A few words about the form. I often refer to Milan Kundera. He's a writer. He's not a traditional literary critic. And surprisingly, it is a writer who does a very good interpretation of Kafka. Critics like professors like you and me are maybe lost in theory, but Kundera, I really feel he's done the best interpretation of Kafka so far. And I quote, "The Kafkan imagination runs like a river, a dreamlike river that finds no respite till the end. That long breath of imagination is reflected in the nature of the syntax. The texts are divided into very few paragraphs. This tendency to minimalize the articulation, few paragraphs and few pauses, but strong pauses, few markers emphasizing the text's logical organization is consubstantial with Kafka's style. At the same time, it's a perpetual attack on good German style, as well as on the good style in all languages in which Kafka is translated." And one more quote, "You can see the long, intoxicating flight of Kafka's prose in the text's typographical appearance, which is often a single endless paragraph over pages, enfolding even long passages of dialogue." In his recent book on literary style, the title of this book is Die Schlange in Wolfspelz, the snake in wolf's fur, Das Geheimnis großer Literatur, the secret or the mystery of great literature. It was published in 2021. Michael Mahr describes Kafka's literary style as a blending of precision and exaggeration, a kind of oxymoron. It is this harmony of the form, the content, and the linguistic expression that makes it a perfect composition, despite it abruptly breaking off like many expressionistic paintings. This topsy-turvy, hallucinating Kafkan world, as Jean-Paul Sartre calls it, topsy-turvy, hallucinating Kafkan world, is a dense, rather condensed metaphor for the enigma that is human existence. The existential issues, who am I and how do I stand in relation to others, remain unresolved and elusive. Yet there is a constant and endless search for this incomprehensible truth. This search becomes a wild goose chase that engulfs all characters without their necessarily realizing what is going on. The action takes place in a universe that resembles none of our familiar worlds. It's an abstract world. At the same time, it corresponds to the real world. Readers from different cultures and regions of the world can relate to it because within the complexities of this surrealistic universe are integrated the possibilities of human existence. The Burrow is, in that sense, a highly charged existential narrative. I would like to end the presentation with some visual images of the narrative in the print media. These are all from internet. This is one cover. The bow. Then another one. This is somewhat similar, but not exactly similar. It reminds me of a game we used to play as a child. You hold it in the hand and there's a kancha, a ball in it, and that keeps moving here and there. Then this is the third one here. The animal is actually shown. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but and you see a tunnel. Then this is the kind of installation art. The architecture of a Burrow, spatial translation of the narration of the narrative above. One I missed. This is another one, and that's it. This is a wall installation. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I've promised I would wind up in 50 minutes, and I think I have kept my promise. Thank you, Shruti.
Thank you so much, Rosy. This was indeed very lucid, very clear. I think I don't even need to summarize what was said. You know, right from the beginning, right from the onset, we were just all ears and we could follow you exactly. The trail of your thoughts was very clear. And I totally understood what you said. And I'm sure everyone here who has listened to me, including my students, have understood you also. My question would be, you know, at the point where you said that you do not agree with the biographical interpretations. You said, well, people have interpreted the Burrow as the diseased body of Kafka, the tunnels as the lungs, and the noises that he hears as a tubercular cough, for example. And you think that it is reductionist. Yeah. Now, on the one hand, I do understand that this is very clinical descriptions. These are very clinical interpretation of the body. And at the same time, there is this one-to-one causal relation. Yeah, it is because he was sick, he wrote this. You know, this is precisely what we also discussed last week. And we were then made to believe, we were warned against the dangers of such kind of a causal relation between the exterior or things that were happening in his life with what he was writing. Yet, you know, since your understanding of Kafka, especially this text, is existential, you know, I feel there is a very strong link between existentialism and embodiment. Existentialism and I'm thinking of Merleau-Ponty. There is a very, very strong link between the biologism also, because Kafka seems to be talking through his body, you know, and that's why I feel, why is it wrong to understand or even take these things into account? Because they do give us a very valid information about his life, about the time that he was writing, and perhaps also, because you said it is all written in the eye. The moment we start reading it, it's already as if we are, sucked into believing that we are actually the duck or the Maulwurf, that we are actually the mole or the animal, the mole-like animal ourselves. And one can actually relate with this idea, with the experiences, the noises that he's hearing in the tunnel. It is very, very vivid. I can totally relate with this many times, very dreamlike, but this is relatable. So my question is really this existential, and I understand how you understand existentialism, and that's why it is even more important that we take into consideration the body, and along with the disease, along with everything that you have, or Kafka was having at this point in time. That's why, or should I be differentiating with the writer and the Maulwurf? Please, could you please help me understand this a little better?
Well, my position is that a text cannot be just reduced to these things, because what he's saying is more universal in nature. It is not if I can relate to it, it's because it's saying something to me with which I can relate. I'm not reading it for knowing his medical history. See, Dostoevsky had epilepsy. It doesn't mean his novels are only about epilepsy. Or if somebody has, I think Proust had asthma, so that doesn't mean he's just talking about his asthma. I mean, what do I care, really? Whether it's epilepsy or, tuberculosis. And then so many people have tuberculosis. They are not all become Kafka. So many people, in fact, all people, I would say, have problems with their fathers. All men, boys have problems with their fathers. Freud was right about it. But, they all don't become Kafka. That's not a precondition for becoming a writer, and a writer like Kafka. That you cannot just say, I mean, Oedipal complex existed before Kafka, and it exists today also, and nothing has changed. Fathers are fathers, all said and done. It is a power relation. Father and son, there is a power relation in them, and okay, they need not be biological fathers. It is who owns and who controls. All those factors matter. The son can also become a father, and the father can become son. That was what Lacan would say. So, but the story cannot be reduced to Kafka's father or Kafka, the man, the son, or his tuberculosis. If it is read in India after 100 years, if it can be read in Timbuktu, in Mexico, in Nigeria, or Assam, in any part of the world, and that too after 100 years, then obviously people relate to it. So they find something in it with which they relate, which is, they may not know who is Kafka, they may not know his biography, they may not, you can even hide the author. The author's name can be hidden, and people may still like it. So it's not, if I want to read about Kafka, I would actually read his diaries maybe. But I think we should, as Kundera says, it's Kafka should be, and there are also many interpretations that reduce him to a Jewish writer. This is again a reductionist interpretation, that he's a Jewish writer. He's only talking about Jewish mysticism. So there are so many Jews. Not every Jew is a Kafka. And if we were talking about Jews only, then why would I bother to read him? So these are, we have to place him aesthetically, in the aesthetic domain, compare him with other writers of his time or before him or those who came after him, but it can't just be he and himself. It can't just be about him. I also have, as a reader, I have to find, if I find something in it, then it is not about his body, his tuberculosis or his father. It has to be something more appealing and something more universal in it, which aesthetically I would relate him with Dostoevsky. In fact, not because they were both sick, but because there's something in it, something in both of them, which could be, could be, you can draw some kind of parallels in them. And later on, of course, it was appropriated by Camus, by so many others. Germans were the last ones to who kind of accepted Kafka, and they were very late. Kafka came from, reception comes from America to France, and then it comes to German-speaking areas, and then East Germany, again, the communists called him decadent. So again, it's not just the Nazis who rejected him. Communists had their own reasons to maintain a distance from him. But anyway, he's still around. I don't know if he wanted to be around, maybe, but because of Max Brod, he's there. So whether he likes it or not, his works were published after his death, and now they are there. So I don't know if I've answered you, but that's it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think Aarti wants to also, yeah, she's raised her hand. Please.
Thank you very much, Rosy. It was quite interesting to listen to your presentation, and it intrigues to hear anything about Kafka. He's an author who keeps on fascinating us, and we are still in a way trying to get through his work. It's really fascinating to just engage with his writings. So my question, I really relate to what you said, Rosy, about trying to understand Kafka from an aesthetic point of view also. Like there are several aspects, his work and also his life. One can engage with both. But since you talked about refer to some installation based on his work. So it's really quite interesting for me to know if you could just talk about his aesthetics or the performative quality of his work. You quoted Milan Kundera, and you said that there is a river-like fluidity in his work. And but I would like to know if you could just relate to a little bit, talk about his aesthetic that makes his work interesting for artists, and what are the performative qualities that you see in his work and that people or the artists like to translate into other forms of art?
Yeah, thank you, Aarti. He never wrote any plays, but many of his works have been turned into performative performances. You can Kafka's Metamorphosis, Report for an Academy, the Burrow. So many have been turned into one character performances on the stage for theater. There are also films. A lot of films have been made. The most famous one is Orson Welles' trial, and there are some others also, other movies also, and yeah, the ones I showed you, some installation art, and there have been so many, but yes, it is in a way abstract art, so it can, it is also painted as, should be painted abstract. Like you said, the beetle or the cockroach should not be on the cover. He had told his publisher. So he didn't want to concretize it to, something which should remain an image or an idea, should not actually, you shouldn't draw it. So, but many artists like to draw the beetle. So, well, that's their decision, but
So in a way, he's challenging the imagination, like we try to right away find a parallel image of what he's trying to say and relate to that, but he's asking us to go beyond what we see, challenges the imagination that we have.
yeah, it is a kind of challenge to imagine the situation and to, draw it or to perform it. So it is a challenge, but there are artists who like it, who don't like actually the other kind of theater maybe, so they go for it. But yes, it's not easy, because every performance or every painting is also a kind of interpretation. It's not just reproduction. It is, you have to interpret it and accordingly do it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. So, but yes, Kafka has inspired, triggered many visual texts.
First Vaibhav and then Khushi.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for the wonderful presentation. My question is this, that in the works of Kafka, actually it is not a question, I just need your feedback whether I'm thinking in the right direction or not, that in the works of Kafka, there are many instances which exhibit a certain kind of absurdity. And when I say absurdity, I mean in the sense when, like in the Verwandlung, the man is getting transformed into a monstrous insect-like creature, and at the same time, there is no exact identification of animal in his stories, as you have mentioned, and at the same time, there's no exact identification many times of the protagonist as well. Like in their process, the main protagonist is not exact. There's no exact identification of him. It's just Ka. His name is only Ka. And the same is in the Fordham Gazettes and in the Verwandlung. So there's a kind of an absurdity. At the same time, there is a kind of an existential crisis which the characters are going through. And in regard of this absurdity and the existential crisis, will it be appropriate for me if I draw similarities between Kafka and Dada artists? Because even the Dada artist never concretized their idea. When we see the photo montages and the collages from of Raoul Hausmann and other Dada artists, so they have never concretized their idea. It's just absurd collection of pictures and which they put together and they try to bring something out of it, but it is never concretized. And at the same time, his Kafka's relationship with his father. And when I see this father and son relationship from a Dada's perspective, I see a conflict between two generations, like conflict with the previous generation. And same was happening with the Dada artists as well, that they were very much distrustful and they had a strong disgust with the previous generation, whose decisions and their politics have caused war. So these things propel me to draw a certain kind of a similarity between Dada artists and the works of Franz Kafka. What Franz Kafka was undergoing as an individual, Dada artists portrayed the same thing on a societal level, collectively on a societal level. So will it be appropriate for me if I draw similarities between Kafka and the works of Dada artists?
In terms of form, yes. I think they both produced abstract forms, surreal kind of forms, mixing, like I said, realism and fantasy. So in a way, this period was the start. Dadaism led to surrealism and further abstraction through, it became 20th century art has been the age of abstract art. Then it came to pop art and all these movements, but it became more and more abstract. Picasso, ultimately, Cubism and all it. And then of course surrealism, mixing, things which don't go together. So in terms of form, I would say yes, there are comparisons. Those dream-like situations that surrealists also referred to, these are, one thing leads to another. They are not independent, then the movements don't just suddenly start and suddenly, disappear. One thing leads to another. So they are in a way interconnected. So those dream-like situations are also what surrealists and Dadaists were doing or trying to do. So this was at the same time, although I've used the word existential very often, but his texts are also very political. You refer to trial, so that's in a way, very political text also. And somebody is arrested suddenly without his crime being mentioned, and the poor guy keeps wondering why he was arrested, and then he finally thinks maybe he did do something when he doesn't recall what he had done. So it is a very political text. It's all about totalitarian states. So what happens in totalitarian states. So and the Dadaists were also political. They used art to make political statements. So that's another point of comparison. Not so much in terms of content, but yes, in their own way, they were Zeitgenossen, no? They were contemporaries. So there you do see some movement towards this abstraction, towards, in terms of form, I would say comparison is possible.
Okay.
The Dadaists were writing more of poetry. Kafka never wrote poetry. Hardly.
Yeah, I mean, I meant in the ideological form.
Yeah, in the mode of present, in the form, in a very general way, I'm saying now. There you do find some points of where they meet.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that was the only doubt which I had, and thank you once again for the wonderful presentation. It was really informative. Thank you.
All right, Khushi.
Thank you, Professor, for the presentation. I had a very small question. So we've seen how Kafka reflected his inner world in his literary works, be it his relationship with his father or his own personal insecurities, feelings of fear or guilt. What I would like to ask is assuming a more psychoanalytical lens while deconstructing Kafka, can we go as far as to say that it was Kafka's own existential crisis sort of situation, which he was projecting on the collective, not just in his literary productions, but on the collective society, on the people of the human race? Since you showed us a few sentences from his diaries, where we can clearly see the kind of mindset he's in, where he's questioning, I haven't done anything today. and what am I doing with my life? These questions that he was thinking about, these existential crisis related questions, would you say that he was projecting it onto the world?
I think he was writing for himself. It's writing for the sake of writing. He was not even pushing for publications. He was, it's writing as a demon, as a maniac, and sometimes not writing at all, but it was his life. But to reduce it to psychoanalysis, again, that is reading, I would be careful doing that also, because they're, like I said just now, they are also political texts. Kafka can be read in a very political way also, especially before the law and trial, and some other stories, they can also be very political. They are not political documents, but they are could be, you could subscribe. I mean, you could relate with them in totality as mirror images of totalitarian state. So again, I would, like I said, there are so many interpretations. They are biographical, psychoanalytical, political, existential, absurd, and Jewish, religious interpretation. So I leave it to you to decide how you would like to read Kafka. But yes.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Yeah, in fact, Yanel, I'll come to you, please. Just a small remark. Khushi has, in fact, written an independent research study on the concept of authority, bureaucracy, and the power of dissent. And when you're talking about the political, she has worked there also. I mean, she's going to also make a presentation on it. And we had a very interesting discussion on various aspects of Kafka, for example, and the term. I mean, you said, well, there is a possibility, and the term literary dissent is also there, which is very interesting, and one can look at it in connection with Kafka, and I think with a lot of conviction, I guess, So
yeah, this bureaucracy, of course, it's everywhere in Kafka's. I think you find it in so many texts, the space of office and bureaucracy, and we all suffer it, so we know.
Yeah. So Jan Helge, please.
Thank you. Thank you also, Rosy, for the very nice talk. I think you have just collectively with the questions and the answers provided, given all the students a very good image of why literary theory keeps developing and changing, and various approaches, turns happen one after the other, because to some extent, we all think that a certain reading makes the most sense. I see value in everything that was said, and this is kind of how you can say close reading makes sense because the biography shouldn't matter. A biographical reading makes sense because, well, he worked in the bureaucracy, and of course his texts reflect the bureaucracy. The spatial turn makes sense in cultural studies because the way the Burrow works and the way the village in the castle is structured and all of this. I mean, every single developmental turn, let's say, or the turns that we call them in cultural studies, they are very reasonable, although they are never excluding each other, and they are never finite in number. It just proves what we're doing here, that everything in the 20th century is somehow appropriate. The deconstruction, the death of the author, everything makes perfect sense when applied to such an enigmatic author, or rather the enigmatic text that he produced. I mean, he himself, with a biography, it's not that enigmatic, but the texts are clearly inciting the need for an interpretation. And we've just seen that everything makes sense, and the way that these turns work is just the largest number of people deciding, okay, right now this makes the most sense. Okay, right now post-colonialism makes the most sense. Okay, right now this particular iconic turn makes the most sense. So thank you for this tour de force, which I also find very elucidating.
Yeah, actually, it was in Delhi University that I read a paper on this narrative, and the seminar was on space. So that's how I developed this idea of space.
How you got into the Burrow.
Yeah, the architecture and the construction and the space, mental thought space. But yes, there are trends, there are fashions in theories. But somehow we don't have to always move with the fashions. We have to also make our choices. Where do I stand vis-a-vis theory? What is, I mean, today, somebody's vegetarian feminism. I don't have to do all that, you know, just because others are doing it, I don't have to do it. So that's where I think,
as long as you don't relate with it yourself.
yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there are trends in theories, so, but there are people who move with the trends. There are those who are more cautious. I think I am the cautious one, always skeptical of every new development. I think they're getting more and more bizarre.
I mean, no one will disagree with you on that, probably. It's just that, you know, the students always asking, but what is the right interpretation of the text? Brings into focus the problem that also you are saying it's an individual choice, it's an individual matter, how to approach literature in general from our own point of view, and that only logically, collectively, these theories make sense. Like not a single one can ever be the complete picture, obviously, but only in their complexity and taking them all together in their totality actually does it make any sense. And that should be what you know, we give them as an impression, that, you know, nothing is ever finite, and now I have finally understood this text and this is the correct interpretation that I'm teaching you.
I would still say the aesthetics of it should be focused on, not just not other things. Okay, the context, etc., but the content also. Content is the same always. Trends may change, but content is fixed. The text is fixed. So let's bring back the text back.
But of course, in your own approach that you have chosen by, you know, looking also at diary entries, also saying, well, bureaucracy plays a very large role. We are all in the end drawn to looking not only at the text, but beyond the text, at the larger world that we live in and that the author lived in. And so there's always a tension, no matter what our unique own standpoint is. But I fully agree with you. It's just, you know, it's a good course in literary theory tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or observations?
I just wanted to add to what I forgot the name. Who's this? The speaker.
Kushi.
No. Helga.
Jan Helge.
Jan Helge. Yeah, I just wanted to relate to that. I really, I thought I agreed to what he said, that we also have to look at it because we are living currently in a very complex society. And it's also nice to acknowledge the complexity and also to deal with maybe also with his text. On one side, it's good to take one particular approach and look at one particular aspect. On the other side, it's also good to look at the text in the complexity. So that's what I really related to that point, and I just wanted to say that yes, Yeah, one could, because there is an aspect, as we saw today, various aspects came in during the discussion. There is a psychoanalysis, there is the theory of embodiment that one can relate to. There is also the aspect of like also the disease. It has become a discipline of learning. Also with from that point of view, one can look at it. And so there is a whole lot of complexity, and because of that, actually reading Kafka is so much more relevant even today. So I completely agree to it that we have to look at the aspect of complexity when we are dealing with Kafka. So it was a very nice insight into it. So thank you.
May I also please
Yes,
do something?
yes, please.
Yeah, Rosy, I was just, thinking the whole time that, when we talk about interpretations, I mean, I always wonder that, I mean, if I talk about myself, if I have to, have this biographical interpretation, I would rather go and read the biography of the author rather than, looking for the pieces of his biography in different texts of his. I mean, if I'm reading Kafka, I would read it like he has written for himself. And yes, a bit of it is also for me as an individual, when I'm reading, his works or whatever. So I was wondering that, this is one part of it. I don't know, it happens with me all the time. When I'm reading a text, I read it only as a text. I hardly think about society also. At times, I feel human beings are so complex. I mean, I end up thinking about human beings only. I mean, rather than going to even society or, political viewpoint or the situation we have, in the country or whatever. So just an observation. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rosy, for your paper.
But sometimes you can just read for the sake of reading.
Yeah,
And,
exactly.
it's not always okay. Can I make a paper out of it? Can I publish something? Can I present
Yeah.
it in some conference? Sometimes you just read and you don't have to come to some conclusion like Professor Tingley had said. You don't have to, you can read it, same text after some years, and you may react to it in a totally different way.
Exactly. I
Because
completely agree.
meanwhile, you have changed. The text is the same, but you have changed your,
Yes.
or the mood in which you are reading it is different. Maybe earlier you read it in a different mood. Today you are reading it in a different mood.
Exactly.
And so it's like a poem. A poem can be, sometimes you are sad and you read it. You see sadness everywhere. But you are happy and you read a text very different, same text differently. So
true.
Rosy, I would like to please draw your attention, draw everybody's attention to a very important point that Rosy made. She said that the Burrow, coming back to the text, the Burrow lends itself for the visual. Right now, and you also said that there is the concept of space and the relation between the Burrow and the concept of space and the architectural design. Could you please elaborate a little bit there? Why do you think, and we saw the pictures that you showed us, they were not burrows actually. I think apart from the first one, the first two that you showed were more like labyrinths. They were more like labyrinths, and the mole sitting in front, and then you saw a tunnel that looked more like a natural burrow to me. The rest of them, they were more creative, more creative takes on the burrow, I guess. Would you please elaborate a little bit about on the architectural designing of this particular text, for example?
It has to be left to imagination how, but from the text, of course, there is a kind of, you do see tunnels, lots and lots of tunnels in the story. And then the animal is sometimes in one tunnel, sometimes in the other. Some food supplies are kept in one tunnel, or should it be kept in the center of the tunnel, which he calls Borgplatz. So all this, this is architecture of his Burrow, but it's not a kind of the usual kind of architecture. It's in the mind, and it's like that. You could there are interpretations that say that all these food supplies, they're kind of his stories. He's enjoying his own production, his own stories, and his own writing. So, but at the same time, it's a kind of is uneasy also. So it is, like I said, it's a detachment to a large extent, but also he seeks some attachment. So that is the dilemma, that how long can you be alone in your Burrow? You do seek some relationship, some, and then you are forced out of that Burrow, which is your life. It is your everything, but you are forced to leave it also sometimes. But you don't never invite anybody in it. The animal is very careful not to, is not only obsessed with enemies, it doesn't let, he would never invite anybody. So that is also his dilemma, to that it's not 100% his, he can't stay in Burrow 100%. He has to move out also sometimes, whether it's for food, or for whatever, but company, for whatever, but he has to leave the Burrow also. And then it is his life is belling, but it is has to be underground. It is not on top of the earth. That is another interesting point. It is not vertical architecture. It is inside. It can't be visible. So it is that all these things go into it.
Is the impending fear of the enemy, innere Feinde und äußere Feinde? He keeps talking about, as you said, intruders and all. Could it be interpreted as the fear of death? Is he already anticipating his death? But there's a lot of chaos in this. A mole is by nature usually a very, very active animal. He's always digging. And also the fact that he has a very strong head which bleeds. That is a very, very important part. It was also a very important part in your presentation and also in the text. The fact that he has to bleed in order to feel good and to feel protected. And he's fine with that. It is so antithetical, it's so paradoxical, and the fact that moles have to actually, they're all chaotic, they're always working, they're very, very diligent workers, and he's always in action somehow. When you read it, it's almost like you're wearing those glasses, 3D glasses, and you're through a picture. It's like we know these experiences today, 4D, 3D, 5D. I don't know how many Ds there are now. So it's almost like you're going through the tunnel along with the beaver or along with the mole, and you can see this. So I don't know, is there a connection between the architectural design and the death, the impending death, or the impending fear of the enemy? How is it connected here? Why is he scared? Why is he always tensed? He's not at rest, apart from those little few moments when he wants to eat and he finds a delight in, in eating something, or feeling comfortable that he has enough in the castle keep, for example. But he's otherwise always under so much of fear. This is and this was not only, I did not see a peripety there, after the 18th chapter, so to say. I had this feeling right from the beginning when I was reading the text. I just didn't feel, why isn't he sitting at one place? Why does he always have to go up and check whether the moss is not being treaded upon? Why is he not sitting at one place? No, he's not doing it. He's just so restless. Why this restlessness?
Well, restlessness is a human condition which cannot be controlled. And I think that's why I said this animal, a particular animal, is very appropriate for the story. That restless kind of, very active, like you said, is always doing, it can't just relax. Relaxation is more of an exception than the rule. So it's always doing something, and it's restless and anxious. Instead of the word fear, I would use anxious, no? Angst. You fear something. There is an object, but angst is ich habe Angst. I am anxious of what is difficult to say. As Heidegger says, it doesn't have carry an object. Ich habe Angst of what is not, you cannot describe it. You just feel anxious, and that condition of anxiety is, it takes over your whole being. And you imagine the world is against you. You imagine all kinds of, everyone is your enemy, and everybody's out to disturb your life, and everybody's, this, there are, I mean, you have to protect your home. What is Vitamin saying? There's also the German obsession with constant home improvement. Yes, that's also true. The animal is always improving, renovation, repair, to be perfect. But then perfect things don't work in life. No, there has to be some imperfection also. After all, perfect gold is also no good. So you have to add some adulteration to it. And so he started with the idea of a perfect dwelling. So that perfect, that itself was, it can't be perfect. No? There is always in life some element of uncertainty. And yes, the anxiety, the not fear of death, but I would say just the anxiety of what happens next. Death is, of course, always on the mind, but this fear of the other, that other by definition is out to ruin my life. The other can be anybody, and the other may be inside you. So you are wrestling with not just with outside physical world, but wrestling with yourself also. So many within you also there is a struggle going on, a kind of wrestling match going on. One says goes in this direction, the other self goes in the other direction. So that constant search for something, for what that search is difficult to define, but it's there. And I mean, you can't pinpoint.
It's almost like what we were talking about. We talked about the tyranny of the higher self and the lower self last time. And Professor Dingley has raised his hand. Would you please switch on your camera and speak?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rosy, for your wonderful presentation. And I do believe that close reading can also be intertextual. And I was just wondering, I mean, the question why my antenna sort of went up was two words, aesthetics and architecture. And escaping, running away from the world up there, you know, on the earth, and going sort of journey to the center of the earth, as it were. And my question is, when I have not studied this text as well as you have, so the architecture of this text, of this Burrow, this is his home dwelling, is it a replica of what is up there? Is it a replica of the known? That is number one. And is the anxiety therefore stemming from the fact, the artist's anxiety, that he cannot really create anything so new? You know, that is one question. The second thing, of course, is, can we at all work with the notion or with the idea of functionality? I mean, the bourgeois in an architecture, as you know, is the spaces are defined. You know, you have a place where you eat, a place where you sleep, you know, and so on and so forth. I mean, on the one hand, I I don't agree with this. And I, on the one hand, I want to reject it and I want to create something new. And I know that I cannot create it on the earth. You know, I have to go below the earth. And does he succeed in creating something so new and defy the memory of, shall we say, the known functionality? I mean, can he change this functionality in any way? Just a question.
Well, it's all, we cannot say for sure what is going on in this, you know, like say topsy-turvy world. It is, you can only talk about it. We cannot just pinpoint that this is the truth, ultimate truth. But yes, what is important is it digs underground. It doesn't want to be visible. What is up on the earth is visible. So he wants something which is not visible to anybody. It should be his little secret. It should be his, you know, his space, and even from outside, nobody should look at it. It should not be transparent. It should be just, you know, his own. And it may not be new, but it is his. That is important. It need not be new. There may be an anxiety about it, but it has to be his own space. It need not be the best.
But I'm really happy and grateful to Kafka for not having created a war machine, you know, like Nautilus, you know, the Captain Nemo's, who is also a hater of humanity and, you know, has a huge chip on his shoulder, a resentment, and he goes under the sea, creates a world of his own, you know. But it's a war machine. Whenever he sees the ship up there, you know, on the surface of the sea, the Nautilus has to come up and destroy that ship, you know. The Burrow is not like that. I mean, it's a very non-violent kind of a nest, which still cannot really get rid of that anxiety, or cannot provide you with absolute safety and protection. And so it's a wonderful text, no doubt about that. Just a few observations.
Now that you said it, I feel it's the Burrow was actually very vulnerable. He didn't create something, you know, magnificent and something spectacular. It was all said and done a humble dwelling and very empty, basically, except for his food supplies. And it was vulnerable, and that is what made him anxious. That this can, all his hard work can just it can crumble in seconds, and that was the anxiety. But what could he do? He was alone. He was the mason, the architect, the engineer. He was doing everything alone and to the best of his ability. But all said and done, it was vulnerable. It was gentle. It was
Wonderful.
It's very interesting, Rosy. I mean, and in the course of the discussion, we feel more and more that you see the Maul Articusteer more as an artist than, you know, the existential predicament. Well, that is only a sub-chapter, so to say. I think the main thrust is in the way you see it. It's more the artist in the animal, in the human animal, if you want it that way. Yeah,
I think that is what connects the hunger artist and this the Burrow. That these are texts not trial is a different kind of text, but this one these are about artists. I feel the artists' predicaments, artists' vulnerability, their anxieties, and well, it is. But there could be other interpretations also. I don't rule them out, but this is what comes out of our talk today. So,
thank you so much, Rosy. This was fascinating, absolutely lovely. We, in fact, have already summed up what this online guest lecture series on Kafka has been. You've already highlighted the fact that there have been so many approaches. We did listen to all the eminent guest speakers we had, including Rosy today, Professor Dengle, Vaibhav, we had Anu Pandey, and we had Dr. Shipra Chaturvedi. And I would like to now invite Khushi to please give the vote of thanks.
Good evening to one and all present here. The culmination of our encounter with Kafka for this semester is yet another beginning that marks the kind of prolific influence he has had on all of us, as we witness a metamorphosis in ourselves, in our ideas, and in our perspectives. Such a massive and fruitful engagement with Kafka would not have been possible without all the experts who graced us with their presence and shared their insights into a troubled but a great writer. The turbulence that surrounds the contemporary times demands us to revisit socio-political notions of morality, justice, the law, bureaucracy, power, and legitimacy as the world navigates its way through feelings of pain, destruction, melancholy, and guilt. On behalf of the students of the JGU community, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Shipra Chaturvedi, Dr. Anu Pandey, Professor Rajendra Dengle, and Dr. Rosy Singh for providing us with a sense of direction and enriching the discourse with their diverse expertise while accompanying us on our own individual journeys with Kafka, which seemed more real and even surreal than one could have imagined at the beginning. Dr. Shipra Chaturvedi introduced us to the Kafkian language and the dilemmas a translator faces while attempting to translate Kafka's literary texts. It was a crucial lecture for our students as we attempted to study not only Kafka, but the German language in which he wrote, and the choice we have to make while translating the German terms to English, ensuring that the initial meaning and significance is not lost. Dr. Anu Pandey talked about Kafka's zoo poetics, drawing on his works like The Metamorphosis, A Report to the Academy, Investigations of a Dog, and many more. We gained insights into the concept of humanimal, which is crucial in deciphering Kafka's portrayal of interaction between humans and animals in his literary productions. This captured the complexity faced by individuals in their endeavor to analyze Kafka's animals, which assumed great importance in his literary trajectory. Mr. Vaibhav Abnave opened up the world of theater to us and explained how he conceived of the docu-fictional film on the Kafka's A Report to the Academy. His interpretations and the stage portrayals by different artists reveal the significance of humanity at the junction of animality, as the actor plays the role of an animal with special attention to expressions and postures. This very creative introduction to cinema and theater in Kafkian world serves paramount importance by fueling the imagination and picturization by giving life to Kafka's literary works. Professor Rajendra Dengle showed us how, despite the opacity of Kafka's texts and his characters, we are able to interpret Kafka in several ways with equal conviction. Our attention was drawn toward the so-called pessimistic anthropology of Kafka's hunger artist, and we realized then one could see him as a fellow sufferer in Kafka's world theater of extended naturalism, an ascetic who ceaselessly fasts without any hope or belief in salvation. Dr. Rosy Singh spoke on the existentialist predicament in the Burrow, Kafka's last unfinished work. By drawing vivid examples from the text, explained how the animal in the burrow comes closest to leading an existence that is marked by angst, solitude, and restlessness, feelings that some have connected with the ailing Kafka. Refusing a reductionist view, Dr. Rosy Singh chose to interpret the text as a comment on the human condition. The session helped us understand the approach one can undertake to place Kafka's characters in a distressed reality that humans reside in. It highlights the real-life human conditions of boredom, intrusion, loneliness, perhaps a lack of purpose, which finds a place in Kafka's work. Touching upon questions of existentialism becoming an integral part of the same as we apply ourselves to deconstruct his literary works. These lecture series enriched our discourse in Franz Kafka and helped us understand not just his literary works, but he himself as a writer and the relevance he holds in the contemporary world. They crafted a Kafkian world of analysis where we students had much to learn. This magnificent experience would not have been possible without all the experts, hailing from a diverse range of fields, bringing something new and constructive to the arena. And last but not the least, I would also like to sincerely thank Dr. Shruti Jain, who provided us with this wonderful opportunity by not only introducing us to Franz Kafka, but also connecting us with such well-versed perspectives on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kushi. That was indeed a pleasure. I'm so glad you all learned so much. And I think that says a lot coming from the students for whom you all were here. You know, I think I don't need to say anything else. So would you like to just switch on your cameras and say anything to the students directly? Do you want to address the students directly, please? That will be really great. Rosy, would you like to say anything? Professor Dingley?
Well, I've already said a lot, I think. I'm just happy somebody organized these lectures on Kafka, and I could be part of it, and I enjoyed every bit of it. And we could connect with Professor Dingley, whom I haven't seen since he retired. So it was nice.
I just wanted to congratulate all your students, Shruti, for their interest in literature. And as you know, I mean, the first class in the 4th year MA, you know, I congratulate the students for having opted for literary studies as a subject which actually takes you nowhere. You know, in the sense it doesn't have any promise, you know, unless you are willing to evidence it yourself, and your interaction with texts and the authors and the teachers and other fellow students, you know, actually realize the importance of engaging with literary studies. I mean, it's a journey into the unknown, into another world, and this willingness demands also a whole lot of courage. You know, the willingness to come down from the earth and to create a burrow, you know, is not an easy thing. Easier said than done. But I think we all do that when we engage with literary texts. And I, for one, you know, have no regrets whatsoever, you know. So I just hope, I wish you all the best, and I just hope that you keep at it, you know, that you keep reading and enjoying your engagement with literature. Thank you so much for being there.
Oh, that's so lovely, Professor Dick. That's really lovely. Thank you so much. Jan Helge, do you want to say anything about your impressions? Just final words, some few words, Jan Helge?
Yes, I can say that I also am delighted that long dead German author, German language, German speaking author, is received in this particular way, because you must also see my perspective is like German studies, where trends are and fashions are somewhere else and all over the place, and Kafka is out and somebody else is in. And for me, it is always very nice to see how, obviously in this case, Indian students in particular, look at this very foreign culture, this very foreign kind of literature also. I mean, notwithstanding Indian authors' international appeal and the way that they also read foreign texts, but the way that it is still a very strange thing to look at interwar or war or post-war literature in Germany in the 20th century and try to glean any kind of knowledge of this in India, in contemporary India, which is a very different country in a very different situation from anything that in Germany was post-war, pre-war, interwar. Is a delight for me, and that, you know, you also like maybe find a new way of looking at the text that you know and love from India, from the Indian subcontinent. That would be my greatest hope, that you actually, like Professor Dengle said, you can do a close reading of all kinds of texts, but also check against each other, compare them, put them in a connection that no one else in this world can do, especially not German studies people, Germanisten, as they dare to call themselves in Germany, that have a very limited perspective on German literature or European literature, which does not take into account the post-colonial, which does not take into account intersectionality very much to this day. So there's a great chance that you can do this, maybe continuing your studies in a master's degree. My students are always very surprised when they learn that they are doing an MA in literary studies. We thought we signed up for German, they say. And then I say, no, it's literature. But this is maybe something that now you already know because of the way Shruti is so wonderfully teaching you all. So for me, very nice. And I look forward to a series like this in the future with different authors or perspectives or even media. I hear there's something maybe coming with movies. Very interesting. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much. And on that note, I sign out, and a lovely evening to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.